People who grew up with strict parents. What was their most unreasonable rule? I had super strict parents growing up. One time they called me at 11 p.m. while I was at a friend's house. Why? Because I left 2 t-shirts on a chair in my room instead of hanging them in my closet. Can you believe that? They made me come home right away. When I got there, my mum had gone through my entire room. She'd emptied out all my dresser drawers, claiming my clothes weren't folded neatly enough. As punishment, I was grounded for a whole week. It was ridiculous. Story 2. My mum was super strict about age ratings for movies and video games. One Christmas, I got Star Wars Shadows of the Empire for Nintendo 64 as a gift. The problem? It was rated T for teen, and I was still 4 weeks shy of turning 13. Mum made Dad take me to Toys R Us to return it. We went to the store and I had to pick out an E-rated game instead. We bought the new game, but here's where it gets interesting. When we got back to the car, Dad handed me both games, the new one and the Star Wars game we were supposed to return. He just said, "Don't let your mum catch you playing it." Story 3. I had a friend whose parents were incredibly strict. They had this crazy rule. If you want to play for 1 hour, you have to practice piano for 1 hour. This and other rules were actually posted on his bedroom door. Can you imagine? Timed music practice is such a dumb idea. It's like they were trying to make their kid hate music. If you want to turn an instrument into an unbearable chore, that's exactly how to do it. I once read an article by a piano teacher who had a much better approach. They suggested setting goals for each week's lesson. It didn't matter if it took 15 minutes or 4 hours to achieve the goal as long as you did it. This method makes so much more sense. It's better preparation for real life too. In the working world, a good boss cares more about results than how long you spent on something. Before delving into the next regrettable recap, please remember to like and subscribe if you would like us to create more of this content. Thank you. Story 4. I had this friend with some really strange rules at home. Get this, he wasn't allowed to say the word stupid. It was like a forbidden curse word in his house or something. One time I said stupid at school and my friend tried to rat me out to the teacher. The teacher yelled at me in front of everyone, but later pulled me aside and said it was actually okay. He just told me not to say it around that one kid. Looking back, my friend was a nice guy. He just had what you'd call a helicopter mum. You know, always hovering, always controlling. Story 5. My parents were pretty chill about most things, but they had this one weird rule. No video game consoles ever, and no online games on the computer either. Why? They thought that's how you get viruses and slow down the computer. Can you believe that? But I wasn't about to let that stop me from gaming. I got sneaky about it. I'd wait until they were asleep, then fire up World of Warcraft. But I had to be clever. I hid the game in this crazy maze of folders. It was like Russian nesting dolls, but with computer files. I'd bury it deep. A hidden file inside a folder, inside another folder, inside yet another folder. I even changed all the folder icons to make them look innocent. It was a pain in the arse, but totally worth it. The thrill of playing when I wasn't supposed to made it even more fun. Plus, I felt like some kind of computer ninja outsmarting my parents' dumb rule. Story 6. My stepmom had this weird rule about shampoo. She decided I was using too much, so she started measuring it out for me before every shower. She'd use a little medicine cup to pour what she thought was the right amount. The problem was, it was never enough. I had really long hair, all the way down to my butt. Trying to wash all that hair with her tiny amount of shampoo was nearly impossible. To make matters worse, I wasn't allowed to use conditioner at all. Can you imagine having super long hair and no conditioner? It was awful. Story 7. When I was in 5th grade, I wrote some private stuff in my diary about masturbating. About a month later, my mum went through all my things. This wasn't unusual. She'd often ransack my room, always finding something to punish me for. Then I'd have to clean up the mess and be grounded for however long she felt like. This time, she found that diary entry. She picked me up from school in silence. When we got home, I saw my bedroom door had been removed. The diary entry was taped to the wall. My mum threatened to hit me with a belt if I didn't answer all her invasive questions about what I'd written. It was a really messed up situation. Story 8. My parents had a crazy long list of things I wasn't allowed to do. Get this. I couldn't use the washing machine or wash dishes. Pulling weeds? Nope. Vacuuming outside my room was off limits, and I had to ask permission just to vacuum my own space. Cooking a meal? Forget about it. Having control of the TV remote? Not a chance. They'd even give me instructions on how to use the microwave, like I hadn't been using it for years already. If I asked where we were going, the only answer I get was out. Real helpful, right? Oh, and don't get me started on clothes. I had to wear jeans, a shirt, and running shoes no matter how hot it was. My dad hated shorts, so they were never an option. And jackets? Nope, even if it was freezing outside. Story 9. In our house, we had this crazy rule, no music with guitars allowed. Can you believe that? I'll never forget this one time. My brother was listening to Black Sabbath's Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. Dad walked in and he just lost it. He grabbed the radio and chucked it right out the window, just like that. So, what kind of music did we end up listening to during our childhood? Richard Marx and Michael Bolton. Yeah, you heard that right. Thanks a lot, Dad. Because of your weird rule, we missed out on so much great music. I mean, no guitars. That cuts out pretty much all rock, most pop, and even a lot of country music. Story 10. My mum was a total neat freak, and it made for some weird rules growing up. We couldn't go sledding or play in the snow at all. Why? Mum didn't want snow tracked into the garage. I never even built a snowman as a kid. I finally went sledding as an adult, and it was awesome. Our closets were like military zones. All clothes had to be arranged by colour, with shades going from darkest to lightest. If the yellows ended up next to the purples, watch out. There'd be trouble. No shoes in the house ever, period. It got super awkward when my brother's friend, who had prosthetic legs and always wore shoes, came over. Mum got mad and confronted him about it. Talk about uncomfortable. Legos and puzzles, banned. They were too messy and disorderly for Mum. Funny thing is, I love puzzles now. It's one of my favourite hobbies as an adult. Story 11. Growing up, my parents had very strict rules, especially when it came to using the internet. I was only allowed 30 minutes of internet time per day, and 99% of the time, my mum would supervise me by looking over my shoulder and commenting on my conversations. We had a device called Web TV, and when my parents weren't home, they would literally lock the keyboard in a toolbox to prevent me from using it. Another unreasonable rule was that my sister and I could never have friends stay over at our house. My mum always used the excuse that the house is a mess. No matter how much we cleaned, it was never enough to satisfy her. The real reason, though, was that she wanted to be able to fight with my dad whenever she felt like it, without any concerns about having guests in the house. Story 12. Growing up, I had to write essays on TV shows that I wanted to watch, just to have them unblocked by the parental controls. I remember writing a riveting piece on the educational and cultural benefits of Disney's That's So Raven. Even after turning 13, I wasn't allowed to watch PG-13 movies. My parents also had a rule that I wasn't allowed to rest my head on my hand with my elbow on any table while there was food on it. Living in a small town, other parents would regularly snitch on me for going just 10 miles per hour over the speed limit. If my parents found out I was going too fast in my car, I had to pay them speeding tickets. Additionally, if I texted a boy, they would make me pay for the whole family's phone bill. By the time I moved out at 17, I had given them well over $1,000 in punishment money, all earned from my job at the Sonic Drive-In. Story 13. When I was 15, I wasn't allowed to talk to boys at all. One Christmas Eve, I was doing some last-minute shopping downtown in our small town. I ran into 2 male friends from my German class, and we chatted for a few minutes, wishing each other a Merry Christmas. Unfortunately, my older sister drove by and saw me talking to them. She told my parents that I was hanging out with boys. When I walked into the house, both my parents were waiting for me and the yelling began. It wasn't a very merry Christmas Eve for me that year. Story 14. Growing up in a large family, discipline was very strict. If one of us broke a major rule, my parents would hold what they called a truth session. All the children would be brought to my dad's study, where the guilty party would be given a chance to confess. If no one came forward, we would be hit in turn from youngest to oldest. The 4 oldest siblings, including myself, would be struck with a sewer rod, while the younger ones would be hit with a bamboo stick due to their age. A sewer rod is a 4-foot-long flexible rubber rod, about an inch thick, with a metal cap on the end. It would leave horrific welts on our skin. These sessions would continue until someone admitted their guilt. At that point, the confessor would receive all the blows that everyone else had received up to that moment. While I acknowledge how awful this practice was, the truly unreasonable part was that the person who caused the truth session didn't always receive the accumulated punishment for having their siblings beaten. Sometimes they would be let go without explanation. causing their siblings to resent them for inflicting pain upon them. This meant that you could be rewarded for holding out and avoiding the punishment you definitely receive if you confessed at the beginning. Story 15. In my family, there were strict gender roles and expectations, especially during the holidays. The females of the family were required to cook and clean while the males watched TV. Every night we had to clear the males' plates from the table. Throughout high school, I wasn't allowed to visit friends' houses or have friends over at our house. It was a strict rule that I had to follow. Another rule was that my hair could not be cut at or above shoulder length. I had to keep it long, regardless of my personal preferences. Until I was in junior high, I had a strict bedtime of 7 p.m. This wasn't just a curfew, it was the time I had to be in bed, and it was strictly enforced by my parents. Story 16. Growing up, I wasn't allowed to shrug or say, "I don't know," in response to any question or situation. It was simply not an acceptable answer in my household. Whenever something technology related went wrong, my parents always assumed that I had broken it on purpose, even if the only reason anyone knew it was broken was that I was trying to fix it myself. My parents also had strict rules about celebrations and social gatherings. Birthday parties were not allowed, and neither was celebrating Christmas. In fact, any kind of party or celebration was strictly forbidden. Story 17. My father was extremely strict when I was growing up. He wouldn't allow me to have any alone time with my mother, and he would constantly beat the shit out of me. But the oddest thing that still bothers me to this day is that he would burn all my belongings as a form of punishment. I understand that seeing my toys and valuables burning was supposed to teach me a lesson, but he didn't just burn toys. He would burn everything. Every year we would go to Maya to buy new school clothes and shoes for me. But sometimes, just days after he bought them, he would burn those too. I remember thinking at 8 years old, now you have to buy me more clothes. But I guess that wasn't the point. One year he took me to the Palace of Auburn Hills in Detroit to see the Harlem Globetrotters. We had a great time, and he even bought me a Globetrotters basketball and jersey that night. However, the very next day I left something on the floor in my room. As punishment, among other things, he burned the basketball and jersey he had bought less than 24 hours earlier, which cost around $150. It just never made sense to me. Throughout middle and high school, my friends would joke about my dad's unusual punishment methods. Story 18. My parents were pretty relaxed, but my best friend's parents were extremely strict. She would often escape to my house for a taste of freedom. When we were in 12th grade, it was time for prom. Her parents allowed her to go, but they told her she wasn't allowed to dance. We all went to prom and had a great time dancing until she noticed her parents standing at the back of the room watching her. After graduation, she moved out to attend university. So she had been living independently and supporting herself for a year. However, when she came home to work for the summer, her parents gave her a 9 p.m. curfew. As a result, she spent a lot of time at my house that summer, seeking relief from her parents' strict rules. By the following summer, she was married, which meant she no longer had to deal with her parents' unreasonable expectations and restrictions. Story 19. My mom had an insane level of control over the food in our household. She had weird rules, like only allowing 1 slice of lunch meat per sandwich. No one was permitted to cook except for her. She would make 1 giant batch of spaghetti or another dish, and we'd be forced to eat leftovers for days, just so she only had to cook twice a week. She didn't work or have any other responsibilities. She simply didn't like cooking every day. For breakfast, we were only allowed a small bowl of cold cereal with just enough milk to moisten it. Sometimes she would bake something called corn toasties, which was just cornbread baked in a sheet pan. She'd cut them into squares, fill the freezer with them, and we could have one as an alternative breakfast option. When I was 14, I bought a pack of hot dogs at the store and snuck them home. I lit the grill and was almost done cooking them when my mum came out screaming about fire hazards. She swatted the plate out of my hand, furious that I was cooking hot dogs when she had been making spaghetti. She called me an ungrateful little bastard. As punishment, she ordered a pizza for the rest of the family and wrapped individual servings of spaghetti in freezer paper. She told me that I would be eating nothing else until all the spaghetti was gone. It took me about 2 months to choke it all down, and I went without eating on many days. On top of that, I was grounded for over a year. According to my mum, this experience was meant to teach me a lot about consequences. Story 20. Oh God, the rules I had to follow growing up were so strict. I wasn't allowed to go out like ever. If I wanted to hang out with someone, it had to be planned at least a week in advance, and it could only happen on weekends. My parents had to meet my friends' parents and drive me there themselves. They would always come to get me before the sun went down. Although it wasn't a specific rule, if I got up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night or was reading because I couldn't sleep, my mum would come screaming up the stairs, "Why are you up?" Sometimes she would even hit me for being awake. Another rule was that I wasn't allowed to close the door to my room ever. There were more unreasonable rules, but these are the ones that come to mind right now. Mostly, my mother would just yell about everything, making life at home incredibly stressful and unpleasant. Story 21. I was forced to drop out of school in the 5th grade because my grandmother had a bizarre belief that most people didn't have souls and were possessed by demons. She told me that the world was a dangerous place to roam freely because Satan was constantly trying to corrupt God's children. This led to an extremely sheltered life for me, with very silly rules like having to pray over every single item that entered our house. Whether it was food, toiletries, or even dish soap, I had to pray over it. My grandmother's extreme religious beliefs also affected my sleep and mental well-being. She would wake me up at 2 a.m. to scream at me for over 3 hours about something that God had allegedly told her I did wrong. Looking back, I suppose the most unreasonable rule I grew up with was not being allowed to leave the house at all. This isolation and constant exposure to my grandmother's irrational beliefs had a profound impact on my childhood and development. Story 22. Growing up, my siblings and I had to deal with a lot of unreasonable rules set by our parents. I think the most absurd one was not being allowed to know where we were going during car rides. Whenever we asked, we were simply told, "Business." We would only figure out that we were heading to the store or another destination once we arrived. This rule lasted until I finally moved out of my parents' house. It was incredibly frustrating not being able to know our destination, even as we grew older. Another unreasonable rule was that we had to ask for permission to use the bathroom every single time. Fortunately, this rule didn't last as long as the car ride one, but it was still a hassle to deal with for a while. These arbitrary rules made our lives more difficult and stressful than they needed to be. And it was a relief when I was finally able to escape them by moving out on my own. Story 23. My best friend had such crazy rules. Her parents didn't like being questioned, so we had to avoid asking them anything at all costs. Another strange rule they had was that you weren't allowed to drink anything during meals. This was particularly odd to me because in my family, we always had drinks with our food. I find it hard to eat without drinking because my mouth and throat get dry and start to hurt, making me feel like I'm choking. However, at my friend's house, you couldn't get a drink of water until after you had finished eating your meal. If you said you were done eating so that you could get something to drink, but then wanted to eat more food later, they would say, "No, you had your drink, so now you can't eat anymore." It was a very bizarre rule that I really couldn't understand. As a result, I tried to avoid having meals at their house as much as possible, just to escape their strange and unreasonable rules surrounding food and drink. Story 24. I had a friend whose parents had a really odd rule. He wasn't allowed to sit on the couch no matter what. This was the first time I realised that something was seriously wrong in his household. The strangest part was that the couch was already in bad shape, so it's not like he was going to ruin it by sitting on it. Story 25. Growing up, my dad was a narcissist, and the biggest rule in our house was not to make any noise around him. Whenever he was home, the entire house would become quiet and tense. Even my mum would eat her cereal in the bedroom because she'd get in trouble for chewing crunchy food in his presence. Thankfully, my mum is now rid of him and married to a much better man. Story 26. Growing up in an Asian household, I had to deal with too many unreasonable rules to count. However, the one that caused me the most embarrassment was not being allowed to shave my legs or armpits. I hit puberty at an early age, so I had really hairy armpits and legs, which was a source of great shame for me. To make matters worse, I was forced to wear shorts to gym class. I felt so embarrassed about my hairy legs that I would wear shorts with opaque pantyhose, thinking it would help conceal the hair. Unfortunately, this only made the situation worse and turned me into the butt of many jokes throughout middle school. Since then, my mum has apologised to me thousands of times for enforcing this rule and causing me so much distress. However, even now, thinking back on those experiences brings up painful and crappy memories from that time in my life. Please like and subscribe if you would like more of this content in the future. And please comment below and tell us about your strict parents. Now it's time for Today I Effed Up stories. Story 1. Today I effed up by walking in my parents' passionately fucking. This happened just 15 minutes ago. I'd been playing Fallout 4 for several hours, having no idea where my parents were. It's important to note that I have a hearing deficit and wasn't wearing my hearing aids at the time. Given how late it was, I assumed my parents were in bed. After my gaming session, I went into the hallway and noticed a faint light coming from the game room. Thinking someone had left the TV on, I went to turn it off. When I opened the door, I discovered my father's head between my mother's legs, about 6 feet away from me. I immediately shut the door and fled downstairs and outside, worried about what would happen next. My father came outside and I nervously asked, "How are you?" He replied, "Fine, but next time knock." I explained that I hadn't known where they were, it was late, and I thought they were in bed. I mentioned not wearing my hearing aids and being unable to hear through the door. I also explained that I'd seen the light and thought someone had left the TV on. I apologized, emphasizing that it was an honest mistake. My father assured me everything was fine and I had nothing to worry about. He just explained that Fridays and Saturdays are his only days to spend time with my mother, so I should be more cautious about opening doors on those days. Story 2. Today I effed up when I asked my parents for permission to have sex in my room. A couple of months ago when I was 17, I decided to have a mature conversation with my parents about being intimate with my girlfriend in my room. We had been meeting in the woods, but it had become uncomfortable and unsafe. I wanted to show responsibility by asking permission rather than sneaking around. However, this led to an awkward conversation that didn't go well. My mother struggled to accept my sexual activity and refused to allow it under her roof. What happened next was unexpected. My mother suddenly developed an interest in hiking, which was clearly an excuse to patrol the woods, where my girlfriend and I and other teenagers had been meeting. She even recruited other mothers to join her on these hikes. I started calling them the Neighbor Wood Watch, NWW. My girlfriend and I were forced to venture deeper into the woods to avoid both actual hikers and the mother patrol. Unfortunately, while confidently leading the way to a new location, I got us completely lost. I was experiencing what felt like premature regret, all the clarity with none of the satisfaction. There were no signs or trails in sight. We spent most of the afternoon just trying to find our way back instead of being intimate. By the time we finally made it out of the woods, it was getting dark, and my girlfriend was thoroughly upset. She declared she was done with forest encounters forever. My mother had successfully made the woods relationship-proof and effectively prevented any further encounters. Now that I'm 18, not much has changed. My girlfriend and I have far fewer intimate moments since the woods are no longer an option, and we can't afford to pay for privacy elsewhere. To anyone else dealing with an increase in maternal forest patrols, you have my sympathy. Story 3. Today, I effed up by walking in on my parents hosting a swingers party. Let me share about how I discovered something unexpected about my parents when I was 12. Growing up, they would regularly take me to what they called parties, where I joined other kids in the basement or rec room. Being between 5 and 8 years old at these events, I never suspected anything unusual. I just assumed the adults were doing boring, grown-up activities while we kids ate junk food and watched movies until falling asleep. Then our parents would collect us in the middle of the night to go home. Later, my parents began hosting these gatherings. As I got older, they would strongly encourage me to spend weekends at friends' houses. I found it odd when they'd suddenly suggest on Thursday evenings, "Hey, you should see if you can spend the weekend at Ryan's. You haven't seen him in a while." But I didn't think too much about it, focusing instead on hanging out with my friends. During one of these sleepovers, I had left my skateboard at home due to expected rain. When the weather improved, I walked the 15 minutes home around 9 p.m. to retrieve it. I noticed many cars on the street but didn't connect them to our house. When I unlocked the front door and walked in, I was confused by all the shoes. Hearing noise from our backyard pool area, which is well hidden from neighbours, I went to investigate. What I discovered on the pool deck was shocking. Several couples, all unclothed, engaged in intimate activities. They were in the pool I'd swum in just yesterday, in the hot tub, and on the deck chairs I regularly used. I was horrified. My parents saw me, but I just walked out, leaving my skateboard behind. I returned to my friend's house and remained quiet all weekend. I avoided going home until Sunday evening. When I finally returned, my parents sat me down for a conversation that lasted until about 1 a.m. Though I initially cried, they were completely honest and open with me, answering all my questions. By the end, I felt more comfortable understanding the situation. Afterward, they started giving me the choice to either stay home during these gatherings or visit friends, always informing me beforehand. Story 4. Today, I effed up by giving my 4-year-old his first existential crisis. I used one of those age progression apps to see what I'd look like at 70 and showed him the picture, not considering the potential consequences. For context, we recently moved in with my best friend who lost her grandmother to old age. This was my son's first experience with death, and he's been very matter-of-fact about it. When my friend or her children talk about their grandmother, he'll sometimes make comments like, "Yeah, but she's dead, so..." He's asked all the typical questions about death that 4-year-olds ask, and I thought he basically understood the concept. His reaction to the aged photo was completely unexpected. He had a total breakdown and cried for almost an hour, repeatedly wailing, "I don't want you to get old and die, Mama. Please don't get old and die, Mama." He kept saying it over and over, as if his words could somehow keep me alive forever. Nothing I said or did could comfort him. He continued crying until he finally fell asleep from exhaustion. It was bedtime. I think this was the first time he truly realized that I would die someday and understood what that actually means. I feel terrible for showing him that picture. I should have anticipated his reaction. Did I traumatize my child? Story 5. Today I effed up by not apologizing to our farmer neighbors. I'm an 18-year-old woman living with my parents, and we moved from a big city to a rural Midwest community last year when my dad retired. We have the smallest lot in the area, surrounded by farmers with substantial land. I've struggled to fit in and had several conflicts with the neighbors and their children. I was annoyed by their early morning farm machinery noise. They complained about me playing rap music in my car at night, though it was only around 9 p.m. And I gave them attitude when one of their cows wandered into our yard. The neighbor eventually spoke to my dad about my behavior, giving him some sort of speech about how things operate around these parts, and suggested I should apologize. When my dad asked me to apologize, I refused, believing they were in the wrong. When the neighbor confronted me directly about my attitude, I told him, "I haven't done anything wrong to you. I just think you should respect other people's property boundaries." He replied, "All right, have it your way," and left. While my dad and I were away for spring break, construction began on a large shed structure right against our property line, about 20 feet from our house. When my mum asked another neighbour about it, she learned it was going to be a pig barn, apparently a known tactic to drive out unwanted neighbours. My parents were horrified. My dad contacted the city about odour nuisance laws, but learned that since the area is zoned agricultural, the neighbour could legally keep up to 200 pigs on the property. When my dad asked the neighbour to reconsider, he said the pigs were already ordered and his decision was final. Now my dad is furious with me and desperately trying to figure out what to do. At first, I suggested ignoring it, but I've learned online that won't be possible. I initially thought my dad was overreacting, but I'm now realising that I may have permanently damaged our property value and made life miserable for my entire family. The barn construction is complete, so we're about to face the consequences of my actions. Story 6. Today I effed up telling my parents about my inheritance. My sister passed away 6 months ago from a heart condition. She had practically raised me, and losing her has been devastating. I'm in my final year of university and have failed every class this semester. Though she'd be disappointed, it is what it is. My sister never married or had children. I lived with her near campus and occasionally helped with her successful side business as a paid intern. She worked extensively, not to support us, but because she aimed to retire by 40. She was just 4 years away from that goal when her heart failed. After her death, her attorney read me her will. She had left everything to me, her retirement savings, various activity accounts, and several real estate investments I hadn't known about. She left me her 2006 Subaru and our house. She left nothing to our parents, who willingly paid for the funeral costs since they were unaware of her assets. My sister was no contact with our parents, and I maintained very limited contact. We were their only children. At the funeral, my parents asked how I'd continue college without her support. Ironically, they thought she paid for it, but I actually have student debt. I told them I'd keep taking out loans. When they asked about living arrangements, I just shrugged, not knowing all the details yet. 2 weeks ago, I discovered through our home security cameras that my parents had brought a realtor to tour my sister's house while I was still living there, attempting to sell it. When I called them threatening to contact the police, they tried to explain. I informed them it was my home, left to me in the will. Their confusion led to a meeting with my attorney. Today, when my attorney explained the will to my parents, my mother turned pale while my father muttered about suing me for his rightful money, plus funeral costs. My mother broke down, telling the attorney he must be wrong. Her daughter wouldn't leave the house to someone like me. The attorney ended the meeting early, and now we're preparing for their inevitable lawsuit. For context, my mother is a country club stay-at-home mum, not the involved kind. And my father is a businessman who's typically away on business trips for weeks. They consider themselves lower upper class. All I want now is to sleep and avoid this entire situation. Story 7. Today I effed up by accidentally ordering my nudes to my very nosy parents' house. My boyfriend's birthday is coming up in a few days, and I plan to make him a photo album with some intimate pictures. Mostly tasteful photos in underwear and some topless shots, nothing too explicit. Having recently moved out of my parents' house, I hadn't updated my address on my Google account. A few hours ago, I placed the order for the photos, but completely forgot about the address issue. I was falling asleep when I suddenly realized my error. Checking the order, I confirmed my fears. The delivery was set for my parents' address. Google Photos won't let you cancel or change the address after 2 hours, and it had already been about 5. This is particularly problematic because my mother is extremely nosy and always opens my mail and packages. If I don't get to the mailbox first thing in the morning, she opens everything and then brings it to me. I've repeatedly asked her to stop, but she ignores my requests and always makes excuses. Now that I'm living in a different state, there's no way I can intercept the package before she does. I'm in an impossible situation. If I call and ask her to forward the package, she'll open it and see the photos. If I tell her not to open it because it contains intimate photos, she'll berate me for taking them. She's extremely paranoid about big tech companies like Apple and Google. She'll probably launch into a rant about how Google will upload my photos to websites, send them to my college and workplace, and ruin my life. She'll likely tell my father too, and I really don't need him finding another reason to be disappointed in me. Story 8. Today I effed up by telling my parents my salary. Let me share about a conversation that's now causing tension with my father. I'm 35 and grew up in a low-income household in the rural south. My mother was a teacher and my father worked part-time as a bank teller. Last week we were having one of those easy conversations about privilege and systemic injustices. During a discussion about trickle-down economics, which they believe will work any day now, I took the position that $15 per hour should be the minimum wage. To provide context, I mentioned that I'd recently reached a 6-figure salary and was proud of working hard to achieve this position. I made sure to acknowledge that I know this is above average income and that I'd only recently escaped living paycheck to paycheck. Well, since that conversation, my father keeps making snide comments. For example, while grocery shopping, he pointed out some French bread, and when I grabbed the pre-made garlic bread that just needs to be popped in the oven, he remarked, "Oh, I forget you can buy things on a whim since you're rich now." Neat. Story 9. Today I effed up by telling my parents I was gay to avoid their arranged marriage proposals. Let me share how I, a 26-year-old Indian American male who's pretty straight, maybe slightly bi if we count femboys, tried to outsmart the arranged marriage process and spectacularly failed. First, let me clarify something about arranged marriages. Many non-Indians think it's simply your parents choosing your spouse, but it's more like your parents acting as Tinder. They use their network to find potential partners, and if you like each other's pictures, you meet in person to decide about marriage. While it's not as bad as people think, the process feels incredibly rushed, and I'd prefer dating someone to determine compatibility. Recently, my parents have been pressuring me about marriage, claiming I'm getting older and need to settle down and provide grandchildren. Every time I see them, which is often since they live nearby, they present a new potential match with pictures of different women. Being non-confrontational, I couldn't bring myself to directly say I don't want an arranged marriage because it would lead to arguments or at least an interrogation about my reasons. So I came up with what I thought was a brilliant solution. I'd tell them I was gay. My parents, though conservative, weren't the type to disown their children, and being gay would give me a solid reason to avoid arranged marriage. I simply didn't like women. During my next visit, when they were showing me pictures of some girl, I looked them in the eyes and said, "Mom, Dad, I'm gay." They got quiet and awkward, asking if I was sure. My mum assured me they'd love me regardless and to do what makes me happy. My dad was more uncomfortable, but eventually gave a similar speech about accepting changing times. I felt guilty about their genuine response, but was relieved when they stopped showing me pictures of potential brides. That is, until last weekend. I visited as usual, and my unusually excited mother sat me down with a binder full of pictures of men. Apparently, my parents had spent the last month searching for gay Hindu Indian men I could potentially marry. So now I'm dealing with the exact same situation, but instead of cute Indian girls, I'm being shown pictures of gay Indian men. Now I'm planning to either find a girlfriend and tell my parents she turned me straight, or maybe marry a twink. I really don't know anymore. Story 10. Today I effed up by ordering a life-size sex doll to my parents' home. As a high school student, I've always been a last-minute crammer, staying up the night before exams to study. After years of this, I've gotten used to functioning on little sleep. It's basically like being drunk for me. When faced with 2 exams in 2 days, I made the questionable decision to stay awake for 72 hours straight to study. Big mistake. For context, I have a habit of buying random items from AliExpress. Around hour 65 of my sleep deprivation while taking a study break, I started browsing. Unfortunately, I fell down a rabbit hole that led me to an $800 life-size doll. With my judgment completely impaired and my first paycheck from my new job having just arrived, $1,400, my sleep-deprived brain saw no issues with making the purchase. When I woke up a day later with my logic restored, the reality of my situation hit me. I live with my very Christian parents, and I just ordered a 5 and 6 and a 65 kilograms adult doll to our house. I immediately tried to cancel the order, but it had already shipped. I won't detail the elaborate scheme I devised to get it into the house undetected. The box was as tall as me, but I managed to get it to my room without raising too many suspicions. Though there were some questioning looks. They're used to me ordering things from AliExpress. The assembled doll now resides under my bed, which barely fits it. So here I am with this enormous doll hidden under my bed, constantly terrified my parents will discover it and disown me. I have no idea how to remove it from the house undetected. It's too heavy for me to even use. The logistics of lifting 65 kilograms are beyond my capabilities. To make matters worse, it's such high quality that I can't dispute the charge. $800 is a significant amount for me, not to mention the additional $300 worth of clothes and accessories I ordered in the same bout of sleep-deprived poor judgment. I know it's just a matter of time before someone finds it. I've at least dressed it so it won't be naked when discovered. Story 11. Today I effed up by telling my parents I am going to masturbate. I'm a 21-year-old woman living with my parents in a 2-story house with the bathroom upstairs. Since childhood, when we'd spend time in the downstairs living room, I've always announced when I'm going to shower. It's just practical so they know where I am, don't knock, and my mother doesn't call for me. It's become a routine. Now, if you're someone with a clitoris and a detachable shower head, you might guess where this is going. Since I was about 17, I've been somewhat fixated on using the shower head for self-pleasure. It's quick, intense, and goes undetected since it just sounds like normal showering. Takes 10 minutes maximum. Lately, I've been thinking how mortifying it would be if one evening I accidentally said I'm going masturbating instead of showering. I usually just laugh to myself about this possibility and go about my business. Not today, though. I'd been aroused since morning and had been anticipating my shower all day. I considered taking one in the afternoon, but decided it would seem odd. Plus, the anticipation would make it better in the evening. So, I'm in the kitchen with my dad while my mum watches TV, casually discussing tomorrow's lunch plans. Mind you, I'm desperately eager at this point and can't stop thinking about the shower head. After a brief silence, I announce, "Sorry guys, I'm way too tired. I'm heading up to masturbate and go to bed." Halfway up the stairs before realizing what I'd said. Silence. "Yeah, I mean shower. Hehe." I fled the room before they could respond. I don't think I'll ever leave my room again. And obviously, I didn't even follow through with either activity. Story 12. Today, I effed up by fixing my girlfriend's parents' internet router, and now they think I watch gay porn. When my girlfriend's dad needed help connecting to their router, she attempted to use the WPS button, but accidentally reset the entire router. On this model, holding the button triggers a reset. After her mother got upset with her, she rushed to get me to help fix the situation. Her mum gave me a notebook containing their emails and passwords, and I went through the process of reconnecting to their internet service provider and setting up a new Wi-Fi password. To test the connection, I did what many of us do, randomly smashed some keys into Google and hit enter. Great, we were connected. Job done. However, when my girlfriend's mum came around to my side of the table to retrieve her password book, she paused, staring at my laptop screen. There it was among the search results. ASDF gay porn, pornhub.com. I tried explaining what had happened, thinking it was a humorous coincidence, but my attempt to clarify only made the situation more awkward. So now my future in-laws are convinced I watch gay porn. Story 13. Today I effed up by falsely claiming to speak fluent French to my wife's parents 6 years ago, and now we're going to Paris together. Let me share how a small joke spiraled into a 6-year deception about being fluent in French. When I first met my wife's parents, I was determined to make a good impression, though they weren't thrilled about their country girl being whisked away by a city boy. During a stiff conversation about the Civil War, my mother-in-law mentioned wanting to learn French. Trying to break the ice, I told a joke. A few years ago, I didn't speak any French, but now I can speak fluently. Apparently it is parler liquide. They didn't catch the wordplay, speaking neither French nor sarcasm. Surprisingly, their cold demeanour transformed into enthusiastic interest. When they started oohing and ahhing, asking for more French, I thought they just really enjoyed the joke. So I shared another. A cat named 123 and another named 1, 2, 3 were crossing a river. Which one made it across? 1, 2, 3, because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They loved that too, though looking back, they clearly didn't understand it. When they began asking where I learned French and if I'd teach them, I realised their misunderstanding. Faced with my wife's intimidating father, who looked like he could chop trees with his bare hands, and fearing awkwardness, I made the split-second decision to lie. For 6 years, I've maintained this charade. My relationship with them has grown stronger, but Frenchness has become my entire identity to them. I overdid it early on, forcing me to maintain an exhausting performance. My wife finds it hilarious and hasn't exposed me. Every Christmas, I give them French wines despite never having been to France. I say merde when deliberately dropping things, learn to make baguettes, and occasionally wear a beret, all of which they adore. Now they've invited the entire family to Paris for their 30th anniversary next year. They're excited about me translating and showing them places only locals would know. These aren't wealthy people, so paying for my European vacation is a grand gesture. I know I must confess, I can't back out. My wife would kill me. And I certainly can't wait for them to discover the truth in France. My wife would definitely kill me. It's frustrating how such a tiny slip has snowballed into this enormous situation over the years. I'm dreading their reaction when they finally learn the truth. Story 14. Today I effed up by meeting my parents after a hookup. Over the weekend, I had an intimate encounter with someone and we went to sleep afterward without me taking proper care of myself. The problem arose Sunday morning when I received a 9 a.m. wake-up call asking where I was. I'd completely forgotten about meeting my parents. In my rush, I just threw on the dress from the previous night, quickly fixed my hair and drove to their house. I was sitting in their living room having coffee before our planned coastal trip when I suddenly experienced an unwelcome situation on their cream-coloured sofa. Panicked, I rushed to the bathroom to clean up, having to dispose of my undergarments and risk going without them. When I returned, I apologised for my abrupt exit. However, upon seeing the discoloured stain I'd left behind, my mother was furious. I made up an excuse about having an upset stomach, cleaned up the mess, and left. I'm now convinced I can never face my mother again after this traumatic experience. Story 15. Today I effed up watching porn with my parents. Let me share an excruciatingly embarrassing incident from a few weeks ago. My stepdad came home with an unlocked Amazon Fire Stick, thinking he'd found a way to replace all their streaming subscriptions. Like many parents, mine aren't very tech-savvy, so they called on me, their 27-year-old son, to help set it up. I agreed, planning to demonstrate why these illegal devices were a bad idea. I visited their house and sat between them on their small sofa. Important context, my mother is partially deaf, so their TV volume is typically set around 50, where most people would have it at 20. It's usually so loud I can't hear myself think. Setting up the device took less than 5 minutes. I demonstrated different sections for films and series, and thankfully, everything we tried was either non-functional or unwatchable, which supported my point. Then, my mum spotted the live TV option and wanted to check its quality. I put on channel 1 and it was clearly worse than Freeview, so they were ready to dispose of it. I went to exit but pressed the wrong button, channel down. This catastrophically took us to the very last channel, a live stream of an adult website. Remember how close we were sitting and how loud the TV was? Suddenly we were confronted with an extremely explicit scene involving two people in a rather athletic position, complete with graphic visuals and incredibly loud sound effects. The squelching, slapping, and various vocalizations will haunt me forever. I froze. My mum was screaming, the performer was screaming, and my stepdad's jaw had dropped to the floor. I desperately pressed every button trying to escape this nightmare, but for what felt like an eternity, nothing worked. When it finally turned off, my mum and stepdad looked at each other and burst out laughing. Meanwhile, I sat between them feeling more mortified than ever before in my life. To this day, I can't visit without them bringing it up as a hilarious joke, while I'm still traumatized by the whole experience.